Good afternoon and good evening to the rest of you. We are back for another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. And it is I, your host Q, coming to you yet again from my mother's basement. And I'm joined by my co-host extraordinaire P. How goes it, P?
As always, it goes fantastically. That's all I got. It's amazing. Super excited for our guest today. I know you as Regulatory Jason, but your God-given name is Jason Brett, as I understand it. Your last name has never been of interest to me. You're amazing. We go way back. Can you give us an introduction to who you are, what you're about, and we'll dive in.
Well, I'll tell you, my God-given real name is Jason Obolski. I changed it along the way because no one could really pronounce it, but Obolski is from a Polish derivation, I believe, a man who walks in the footsteps of God. However,
that's incredible.
For the purposes of this show, not to be, kind of a heretic, but I'll be maybe the man that walks in the footsteps of P and Q. So with Brett as my last name, I changed it because everyone always mispronounced it. Actually, I'll tell you what really did it for me. And my parents encouraged me to change my name was I put my car in the shop, P, and I couldn't get it back for 4 weeks because when I put it in the shop, they said, "Oh no, this isn't your car," because they had misspelled my last name on the title. And I said, "That's it, I'm done." And so Jason Brett, Brett is my middle name. So yeah, Jason Brett. And I do a lot of policy work around Bitcoin. And I've been doing it also around blockchain since 2016. I got my whole start in the world of finance in 2008 during the financial crisis, where I was actually a capital markets regulator in Washington, D.C. for one of the top regulators, FDIC, dealing with all of the financial crisis stuff. So it's nice to be here.
Well, thanks for joining. And, I first was introduced to you on Clubhouse. We would be having these, very, very kind of far-ranging, some would say, frenetic conversations. And you always would come in and you have an incredible sense of humor. And you also, it is backed by a deep body of knowledge and an ability to, I would say, connect many different ideas and concepts from, the regulatory side to the legal side, to the, the macro side, and really bring it all together and offer incredibly informed opinions. So I'm trying to say you're a great dude and excited, but
that's really nice. I tell this to everybody, P, that in this sort of the way we've connected is when I started in 2008, I kind of missed any opportunity in terms of being in the regulatory world for 4 or 5 years, the financial crisis of maybe being quote unquote in Bitcoin early. But I had this experience where I was on the inside of the government seeing our financial world collapse and realizing and saying things to myself that we all talk about regularly now, how like the dollar is going to be worth nothing. There's really nothing backing it. And this is like a second chance for me in life at my age to kind of come back and see all these younger people talking about this experience. And I feel like it's something I've always thought about and can really bring home when people are confused or trying to figure out maybe why they want to, buy Bitcoin, or maybe they want to go buy DeFi or something, out there really crazy, right? That will then end up getting them wrecked. And it's all just from my initial experiences as a regulator. So it's exciting for me to see all the people here talking about what I was thinking about, and felt like I was the only one thinking about, gee, the Federal Reserve keeps getting bigger and bigger all the time in 2009. But I appreciate it. And your sense of humor and your take no shit from anybody kind of attitude on Clubhouse was awesome. And it's just so happy to see you here, live on Bitcoin Magazine. So it's very exciting for you as well. You're a great dude too.
Thank you.
I still have to learn about Q though, but
you are in for a treat. Q is absolutely incredible. He just crushed it on the news desk and has been doing that for a while. And it's at the conference. He's amazing. But I want to say one other thing.
Share one quick story though.
Go for it.
About like names fucking things up. But P, do you remember the time that me putting my full name into the Bitcoin 2022 speakers profile like broke the entire algorithm that you made it? Everyone with a Q in their name started to get my bio.
Yes.
You have now scared me from ever listing an apostrophe, which is legally in my name. I refuse to put it in.
Yeah, I messaged you very angrily and was like, bro, you can't just like fill out the form for like 5 people. And you were like, I didn't do shit. And I was like, oh no. And then it was all my fault, but I still blame you. Also, Jason, I just want to say, I imagine you in, in the early days of your Bitcoin career, just being in a very serious meeting in Washington, DC. And, everybody's talking, and then the camera pans across and slowly it like fades into like, wah, 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 and you get like more and more frustrated. And then you just stand up and scream, the dollar's going to zero. And then you throw your briefcase and then storm out. Don't try to tell me that's not what happened. That's what I choose to believe.
I'm feeling better now that they've, let me out of the prison in DC after I did that stunt. Because obviously they put you into quarters and protect you when you do things crazy like that. No, it's hard. Like, I'll tell you this, it's funny that you say that, because like for a while we had like a lot of the companies really talking about it. We still do, like IBM in particular. And the focus was talk about blockchain, but they couldn't talk about Bitcoin. It was literally in their policy. They couldn't use the word to describe it. So it's kind of like, Jeopardy, right? Like, let me tell you about this thing, and it kind of like moves money around on the internet. It's like maybe got some bits and bytes, and it's sort of like a coin, but you couldn't say the word Bitcoin. You literally,
that is fucking crazy. I had no idea.
It was against their company policy. You couldn't describe that in DC because so like, and if you go back in history, and it's funny, I was just on the Charlie Shrem podcast. We're talking about how there was originally the Bitcoin Foundation, 2014. And when that fell apart a little bit, that also, between that and the Silk Road, made it such that, talking about Bitcoin is like trying to go talk about cocaine or heroin with a, congressman. So it's been a challenging environment. It's starting to get better now.
Good stuff.
I want to throw something out there because it's relevant news, and I got distracted on Twitter, full transparency, because someone finally found the clip of, do you guys know who the Besties are? Like the All In podcast, Jason Calacanis, David Sachs, Chamath Palihapitiya, and David Friedberg. I do enjoy their show. But it was like, I want to say 6 months ago when Solana like did its pump, they started talking about the fact that like a couple of them, David Saxton, Chamath Palihapitiya, like were early on Solana, but like early, I put in quotes because Chamath is like bragging about how like they got gifted Solana for free or on a steep discount, and now their bag is worth over $1 billion, and they're literally joking about like how they're dumping it onto retail. without explicitly saying this, of course, but like that was what my takeaway was from it. And we're yesterday watching Solana literally shut down. We're further reminded of the scam that is. And I'm curious from a regulatory perspective, like with these things not being deemed as securities right now, like who is to blame? Is it the lack of education out there, or is it the people running these scams, or is it regulators for not stepping in?
It's such a great question. So one thing I think that's interesting is if you look back at 2016, the SEC did an interesting move with Ethereum, let's call it, where they had this report called the Dow report. And they kind of broke down why this would be a security, even though the Dow, as we all know, was this initial project that got exploited and was shut down. So it's kind of like if you're a regulator, let's pick a project that's not live and show you why this would have been a security. So they didn't come out and do enforcement action against those folks in Ethereum. They just sort of made an example and said, going forward, if you do something like this, you could face regulation. I think in retrospect, that approach probably has allowed the ecosystem to grow quite a bit, but has also led to a lot of the perception that you may be a security, but it's okay to still operate because it's really just not that clear whether it is or it's not, and there's no real enforcement. It's kind of like the best example I can give you. And by the way, the regulators are aware of this. They realize a lot of people operate realizing they're probably securities, and it does not, it does not seem to change some of these behaviors. And so what the regulators are starting to realize, and I think people are starting to see, is more of enforcement. But the best example I can give you is it's kind of like being on a highway and you and I are driving and we both suddenly realize, hey, speed limit says 55, but no one's pulling anybody over, let's go 100, let's go 110. I see you going 110, I better go 120, and then you get people getting wrecked, right? So that's like the analogy I would use for sort of where we are today. It's not that people don't know. It's kind of we're in the don't ask, don't tell portion of our crypto history. And I have a feeling that's going to change. I've heard rumors, and I've heard enough informal discussions where I think the regulators now realize exactly what you're saying, Q. And what they've decided is there has to be some enforcement. I think initially that was tried with Ripple, but and I pause because this country, it's like, if you have enough money, you can fight anything in court long enough, So if you notice some of the scams that got shut down, some of the ICOs, if you look at some of the smaller operations, they almost were doing the same thing as Ripple, but they didn't have the money to keep fighting it in court. So that's one of the downsides of the legal system, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Another thing that happens, and I say this as if it's a profound statement, but obviously it's not, is, you have everybody's doing the calculation of like, hey, how much can I get away with? And then what are the fines going to be? So you just factor in like, well, if I'm going to make $100 million and I'm going to have to pay a $1 million fine or a $10 million fine, that's still an incredible return. And so that's an interesting analogy that, kind of being on the highway and seeing the pack around you, driving 120, and you're like, well, I guess I can push it to 119 and be safe.
So long as you're not the fastest car on the road, right?
It's like, stay competitive. Yeah.
I'm curious though, if things like, maybe I'm too loud. Sorry guys. I'm trying to fix the audio. I see your comments in the chat. But do regulators who barely understand the internet, let alone like the technologies that we are discussing on a daily basis and interacting with on a daily basis, are they the best people to be making these judgments, or should it be coming from, the communities and trying to push in the right way? Like I say that knowing full well that is essentially what we have been doing to no avail. And that's why you're seeing rug pull after rug pull and everything unwind over the last 2 weeks. Um, it feels like we're putting our faith in the wrong people, but maybe I'm just so turned off by the government at this point and I'm not giving them credit.
Yeah, I think um, the people at the top, like if you look at the person who is the head of the SEC Digital Asset Division, um, she has a law degree from a top school. She has a degree from MIT in computer science. And if you listen to her talk enough about it, it's clear that she understands it. Um, when we say like the regulators just don't understand, I was in the position in 2008 where you could argue I I would not have any understanding of how a CDS trade would work, but I had to do an analysis for the chairwoman Sheila Bair of the FDIC with a lot of other folks. I was a junior analyst to look at how people were actually trying to trade Citigroup to zero. And so as a regulator, I had to be inventive to understand how the trade actually happened on the floor, to see people were buying the credit default swaps, shorting Citi, hoping Citigroup would go out of business and then they could benefit by cashing in on their CDS, which is ultimately why the SEC froze short selling for a month back in '08 to help the economy keep going. So when you say like the regulator doesn't understand, and I don't want to pick on you, Q, but I want to say there is, and I was just at a conference where someone finally used the right word. They said, there's a microeconomy of these lawyers and consultants out there who are making huge amounts of money over the fact that they keep saying it's really not clear what the guidance is. And they're making tons of money and they live off the fact that there's this lack of clarity. And at the end of the day, the one person that's been starting to come out of the cave and share it, I think, well, is Michael Saylor from MicroStrategy saying it's very clear. You know, if you're operating in a way where you just said at the beginning of the show, you're dumping on retail, non-suspecting retail investors are bearing the brunt of giving you your profit and then it's their loss. That's like what the SEC was created to defend. So yeah, maybe there's some lack of clarity, but that microeconomy of like lawyers is big. It's not just micro. And it's hard, you know, that's where sort of there's these points in society where, you know, you, me, and P are on this highway all competing, right? No one's pulling anybody over. And, you know, you're going 130, I'm going 125. And P's like talking to his lawyer saying, hey, I want to go 135. And then before you know it, the lawyers are talking to this and they're trying to tell the regulators, oh no, they're only going 30. It might look like they're going 125, you know, but no, they're following the speed limit. And that's where you get into this debate into like what is actually reality. So I think we have to be really careful when we say the regulators don't necessarily understand something. I bet they understand a lot more. And I think a lot of people make a living off of just saying that idea of, well, the regulators just don't understand it. I think they do. But I also would say, and this is maybe where you want to give up on government, and I understand that, and I hope people like you don't ultimately totally give up on government, is the regulators' hands ultimately get tied a lot of times by whatever the current statutes are, by whatever the politics of the day are. You know, that's where things probably burn off the road where, yeah.
How does the sort of revolving door within the, Bitcoin and the quote unquote, well, let's just call it the shitcoin space, as it pertains to regulation, how does that work? Is it any different from the existing revolving door we see around, every other industry? What do you think?
I think it's the same. I mean, same revolving door. Like, there's nothing really different about it. And I wish I could say it would be a little different with this type of revolution that we're all experiencing. But I think the Hinman speech. So Bill Hinman, director of finance at the SEC, was at a law firm, and he gave this speech saying Ethereum is not a security when he was at the SEC. But his law firm was a member of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. And so his law firm, and he had been told by his speech that he probably should stay away from saying one thing or another about it. So the only evidence that people go by for certainty in this environment as to why Ethereum is not a security is because of what one person said who was probably biased in his speech. And it was just a random speech from someone that wasn't even a commissioner. So that's where I think he's now out of the SEC, and he's now into all these, as you say, like, the shit coins, another back at the law firm doing his thing. Hey, Bill. Hi, Bill Hinman. How you doing? You want to come on the show, hang out and talk to us? No, I'm Hinman, if you're listening to this, Hinman, like, there's no, like, I'm not trying to throw shade. I'm not trying to criticize you about it, but if you look at it from an objective standpoint, it's like, if you want somebody to come in and give a realistic interpretation of what one of these digital tokens is, and you're going to say it's not a security, I think everyone would agree you'd want that person to be fairly neutral. It's like kind of common sense, right? But,
Yeah, I think, and I harp on this a lot, but it's as where person Highlander Charlie Munger loves to say, you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. And I think there is a lot of effort put towards obscuring the actual incentives. People love to kind of virtue signal and be like, I am a just individual, and I, have come here to do what is right and good. And that's the error. And I think the issue is not that people are self-interested and self-serving. I think systems that account for the reality, which is that we are all self-serving individuals, right? There is evolutionary pressure at the genotypic level, at the group level, at the individual level, at the societal level, and those things should be celebrated and acknowledged. And they certainly, impact business as well. Everyone is out for the things that they care about, which includes their own self-interests and the interests of those that are close to them. And I think that that should just be acknowledged and, accounted for. And as I say often, that's one of the things that's so compelling to me about Bitcoin is that it successfully starts to align the incentives. So what is good for the individual is also good in many cases for the network. And not all the time. There's issues there. Nothing is perfect, including Bitcoin. But I would just love to see the political realm, the regulatory.
P, you muted yourself.
Shit. Well, you guys get the gist anyway.
yeah.
Do you ever think that will happen? Do you ever think we'll live in a world where the actual incentives from a regulatory, from a business perspective, from a political perspective will be acknowledged? Or do you think that, as I do, that's just, there is too strong of an incentive to obscure that fact in order to convince people that one is virtuous and just?
I think everyone kind of understands there's a little bit of bias in the system. So I don't know if we'll ever get to that point. I wanted to go back a little bit to kind of ask Q, like with you talking about this idea of like one thing I hear a lot that's interesting is how Bitcoiners, like the way we talk about this is, and P, I know you have such a great ability to sort of hone in on when somebody might be shitcoining, or there might be some element of they're trying to talk really good about Bitcoin, but maybe they have like a shitcoin going on in the background, And the question is, when it really comes back to that idea of like, if you're going to be then dumping it on the unsuspecting investor. And so when you think about Commissioner Hester Peirce, she's like a libertarian. It's like, if we didn't have this government working, overseeing all the different things that we're doing, right, with the SEC, let's say, imagine they weren't out of it. It's like, we have this one Bitcoin and we're saying, hey, this one Bitcoin is the most amazing thing. And then we have this other opportunity that is like that, but there's that loss of value of that person who then goes and buys the quote unquote shitcoin and then ends up losing their money. And they didn't have that there's that opportunity loss where they could have just put it in Bitcoin in that fair system. And it kind of drives us all nuts. And I think, Q, a lot of times I think I hear this concept that we're being criticized as individuals in the Bitcoin ecosystem because we're asking the regulators pull out their, sticks and start beating up people and tell them to enforce the law already, because all these people are unsuspectingly buying something that's no good. But at the same time, is it sort of, we're in this just gold rush where people will either realize what the good stuff is and get it, and there's just always going to be those charlatans. That's kind of just the way history works, and we just come to accept it, because in the Hester Purse world, the warning is we don't want to necessarily get to that enforcement side of things so much, because then we just need somebody to come in who can change the system and said, I need to do this to Bitcoin. Before they know it, they're putting the screws to Bitcoin all day long. So at a certain point, I think we have to kind of like do our best out there, P, to kind of tell people what could be a shitcoin, but if they're going to go do it, they're going to go do it, and not rely on a regulator to solve that problem for us.
I could not
Jason,
agree more.
I think you touch on exactly like my issue with it, which is this idea that if people want to go and invest in whatever they want, they should have the right to. But right now there are so many blockers and rules around. Like, I'm not an accredited investor, so I can't participate in private markets unless I fall under the friends and family investor pool. But even if I fall under that investor pool class, I can't sell my shares. Like, I can't go shop my shares out, at least. I live in the state of California. I love sports. I make a lot of money gambling on fantasy football. But the truth is, like, that money has to go through different channels and make it look like I'm in a different state. Like, there are all of these weird rules that are in place. And I think
This is not something you should admit on a recorded podcast, Q.
Oh, what? That I've literally made the equivalent of like one family's annual salary in my lifetime earnings on fantasy football?
Yes, that is that specifically is
That specifically, like the average annual income is my balance on. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It goes back in my mind when you like start to like kind of play with the strings and you loosen everything out. You realize like, well, why is this an incentive structure there? Like, why is it, or why are these guardrails there? And as you peel the layers back, you start to realize like, oh, it's because they control the flow of money. And because they have that control of money, they want to have this semblance of understanding of, we want to limit how much money goes into this market and limit how much money goes into this market. And so right now where my head is at, like full transparency, yes, I do want to see something come out, at least that says and separates Bitcoin from crypto at large, calling everything else a security and allowing Bitcoin to be denominated as an asset. That is my short-term solution. My long-term solution, however, is to just simply separate the money from the government. And in doing so, you loosen these restriction guardrails. If the government has no say in money, how it's printed, how it's spent, how it's used, who's going to stop them from me investing in the latest startup because I deem it as a good investment? Who's going to stop them from telling me how I should spend my money, how I should deem it fit? There was this study or whatever, I didn't really read it, but something went around online talking about how like there's a good majority of people who make $250,000 a year and are living a paycheck to paycheck. I'm sorry, but if that's you, you're a fucking idiot.
I know.
But also,
what
like,
are you? Yeah.
But that's your prerogative. Like, you're an idiot.
Absolutely.
But that's your prerogative. No one's telling you how to spend your money. You are making those decisions.
You're right.
But then these limits and clamps aren't put on people like that, because someone who makes 250K, fuck it. You live in a jurisdiction that doesn't let you gamble, but you like to gamble. Guess what? You're probably going to Vegas more often than you should. Or like your salary dictates that you're actually able to be an accredited investor. And then you're maybe investing in things that probably are scams and you don't know better. But just because you have that salary, in the eyes of the regulators, you are therefore deemed, a better investor. And these clamps don't impact them. These clamps impact people who make less than six figures, who want to try and break out and above. The biggest gains aren't made in the public market. The biggest gains are always made in private markets, historically speaking. And you've just taken out the population that needs those level of gains because of the regulations in place. But I'm just now ranting and rambling at this point, bringing up a lot of different things.
No, I look, I think the accredited investor rules needs to be taken down. That's something that is a real blocker. I'll give Representative Bobby Rush a real shout out here. He's introduced a bill the last 2 or 3 congressional sessions in a row. And he talks about using blockchain technology. So for what it's worth, for those who are listening on the show, and our focus is Bitcoin, but he talks about this of giving people an opportunity who are in minority classes or don't have a lot of money, the opportunity to make these big gains. And it creates that space of, why aren't we exploring this technology more to do it? And so that's like, at some point or another, we have to be willing to realize that people, as you say, it's just as it's the prerogative for somebody who's making $250K a year to be, bumming, asking for gas at the gas station because they don't have money, to, somebody who wants to just make some money, whether it's, fantasy football, or whether it's, looking at a particular friend's stock, like you said, those are opportunities that we need to start allowing ourselves to enjoy. And that's where, it's funny that the downside of this can be, right? And I mean, we could talk about this for like hours, but so let's say we do have some clarity. Like, so for Bitcoin, we have clarity, right? Like, in that we've been told it's a commodity, it's moved to the CFTC. We all agree with that, right? And even Gary Gensler said, Bitcoin is definitely real. It has distributed systems, and it has cryptographic protections on keys that allow this ownership of individuals. So there's no real argument, right, that Bitcoin's now a commodity, which, if you look at all the other shit coins, they're like, has the holy grail. They're over at the CFTC. They don't have to worry about all this stuff. Well, just 2 weeks ago, Commissioner Rossen Benham, who was just nominated by Biden, and the Senate confirmed his appointment to be the chair of the CFTC, said publicly in a ESG forum about sustainability that he wants to develop a system of to move away from proof of work, and that we should only have proof of stake in the industry because there's too much energy being used by Bitcoin. And this is the regulated Bitcoin now. And so that's where there's this, like, it's like a trap door, right? Like, we switch from the regulator, we think everything's good, and now we have the ESG attack coming at us from the CFTC on Bitcoin, which makes no sense. They should be defending Bitcoin, but
it really doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and the sad thing is that there's, sometimes you wonder, because you hear, that's when you lose faith in government, because he's just talking about it, assuming that Bitcoin uses all this energy and that's bad for the environment. And so therefore we just have to move to proof of stake. And it's like, okay, yeah, we have to start moving to proof of stake. And all of us are like, wait, you're all crazy people. Why are you leaving the room saying we have to go do proof of stake? Let's go back and look at that statement for a second and break it down. Plus, for Commissioner Benham and others, like, the White House just issued an executive order on this, and it was actually a very fair executive order on digital assets that's looking to compare proof of work to proof of stake, and they want to better understand it. The whole point of doing an educational executive order is so we all do reports and think about it that aren't due till September. So why is Chairman Benham, in May, jumping to the conclusion already that we just need to eliminate proof of work models and move all the way over to proof of stake, without having that discussion and having that understanding that we need to have from a scientific perspective of what are we really talking about. So that's the danger. I don't know, if we could come up on this show with a way for a regulator to be sort of a DAO almost, so it would not be influenced by just one person's opinion and could, affect the rules so much. That'd be a pretty good start, right? Find a way to clamp down on the really bad ones that are out there, Q, but also keep things in a way where it doesn't shift all the way to, okay, well, this is Bitcoin, this is safe. Oh, but now we have a problem with how much energy it uses. So we need to move on to other coins that aren't going to be so energy intensive.
I got an idea for you, but like, couldn't we create a DAO that was just a super PAC and like start putting them into specific candidates' pockets, and then all of a sudden you start to have, because in essence, in my opinion at least, the current system is your donor pool is your DAO, and the more money a donor puts into that pool, the more influence they essentially have. Which, correct me if I'm wrong, people, like, that isn't in essence the technology behind a DAO. The more shares that you buy, the more influence you have in it. Like at its root level, like yes, there are nuances that are different, but at its root level,
it's not necessarily how much you buy. I mean, there's many ways of setting up a DAO, but
fine. A DAO set up strictly on the number of shares you hold, like a proof of stake DAO, which I under the assumption I don't dive into DAO, so this is me just like completely talking out of my ass. But like I'm just assuming that it would be proof of stake given where they live.
I mean, again,
Your
it's
silence is agreement. That's it. We don't need to dive.
Look, I don't want to say absolutely not, but I'm going to strongly imply that's what I said.
But to your point too, Jason, like this system right now that we have has this inherent flaw. Like I will just continue to use California and dictator Newsom as the example. Like, look, whatever, fine. I have voted Democrat for like my entire life. If anything, like, yes, I do probably align more with more progressive social policies, but especially over the last 2 years where dictator Newsom has had this emergency mandate and like powers that he gave himself because of COVID, he still has these powers. And throughout the last 2 years, he has just been giving no bid contracts to big corporations that donated to his campaign. But no one wants to talk about that. But that in essence is got, to a degree, what you're describing, where, hey, they've put enough money behind this candidate, and this candidate now is going to pay attention to what they care about. So that's why I present the idea of like, let's create an ESG DAO and ESG FUD DAO. And then we create a mining DAO. We create a payment DAO. We create a sound money DAO. And then each of them start going after each politician. And all of a sudden, when they start to realize, like, wait, my biggest donor base now isn't Pfizer. My biggest donor now isn't Bank of America. It's the Bitcoin DAO.
I stopped paying attention after the third time you said DAO.
DAO.
I love you.
Yeah, I feel like I appreciate that effort, and I encourage the idea of being imaginative, but no, as P would say. Sorry, Q. Just a big no. What I will say is I do think, though, that you're on the right track when you talk about how the industry can start to do its own sort of self-regulation, right? And no, it was a really good try. It really, really was. It's going in the right direction.
You're so kind, Jason.
But like, so for the FDIC, where I came from, the FDIC is funded by assessments from the banks on the deposit insurance that they pay. So I'm not saying that, and please, I'm not saying, Nick Carter, I'm not saying that we need to have Bitcoin be a system like the FDIC, because he'd probably shoot me on sight. What I am saying, though, is if you think about that system, the regulators, the FDIC isn't like a regulator of the government that has to go to Congress, right? It's the industry really paying for the FDIC regulators. So at the end of the day, it's like you almost have a sense of self-regulation because you're all paying assessments into whatever the FDIC deposit pool was. So at some point or another, I think maybe if Bitcoin were to have its own regulator, so we can get out of all these old antiquated terms of commodity security, confusion for it, and just say, look, this is a new form of digital asset class, and have the regulators be part of the industry in a way, and create, there's lots of SROs, self-regulatory organizations. So we'll say, the Winklevoss twins did a nice try with sort of the Virtual Commodities Association, never really took off, but you see a lot of that, right? With the SEC and the CFTC, like the Futures Industries Association, others like that, where maybe there's like a Bitcoin Investment Association, right? A BIA or something that can help. I don't know if you're leaning over that way, P, or trying to distract me, but I remember our original Basel guy. Don't know that. That started on Clubhouse. Remember that? We were talking. Oh, yeah. The guy, that's how like you and I first connected, was on our
that's right.
Yeah, the head of this is the ultimate first, and so yeah, it's totally lost my train of thought. No, so yeah, the SRO, so that's that's where I'm saying, so Q, like, I think like if we think about that, I don't know how quite that works, but I think at some point or another, the grayscales that everyone in the world maybe needs to we all need to get together. We're like really committed to Bitcoin and kind of come up with a way of saying, hey, we're going to police this stuff out. We're going to police out the shit coins. We're going to find a way to do some of our own governance that may be supplemented by the SEC and the CFTC while you figure it out, as a way of so you don't have to ever come down and try to clamp down hard or do something that would be like really, really bad, which we've seen, right? We've seen China and others do things, just ban it outright. We're probably not there, but it's a sign of the growth of an industry when you're actually ready to have those self-regulators. It happened a lot with Wall Street when we saw what's now FINRA, which is really where any stockbrokers have to go get licensed before they can start selling you securities. But that grew out of them realizing they needed to really do some background checks on the brokers as Wall Street got bigger and was opened up more to the people. And I think maybe we need to think about that. Maybe that something like that will just organically grow. And that way it's sort of part of the system. It's a self-regulatory organization, but it isn't attached to the government. It's something that we just police ourselves. We police that highway where everyone's going so fast so people don't literally die.
I'm a big fan of, I think the people rely on the government to ensure their safety too much. In my opinion, there is always a need for some kind of frameworks that, enforce some kind of safety. But I think the idea to pull it back to something you mentioned earlier, Q, the report that came out recently that was like, people making $250K a year are living hand to mouth, like that is a choice. You do not have to be expending so much on money. And I think that's okay. As you said, like you should be able to choose what you spend your money on, what you invest in, what you use the electricity and the energy that you pay for. Like you should get to decide exactly what you do with those things. And you should bear the consequences of those decisions. And so I think, what a lot of people don't realize is, it's this vicious cycle where when you start regulating or you start setting rules around why people can do things, you remove the responsibility from them to make the right decisions. And that makes people very, very lazy. And people like being able to be lazy. And that is a critical and egregious mistake. In my opinion, everybody should be held accountable for the decisions they make. And we shouldn't be looking. I think that, Jason, you spend a lot of time defending the ability of others to make those choices and to prevent regulators from overstepping. And I think that's kind of how we should be viewing it, rather than sort of like, what can we regulate further? I think it's more about like, what can we very clearly demonstrate to people that like, no, you have radical responsibility. You are the one who makes the decision, and you better be ready to bear the consequences.
Yeah. One thing maybe, because I'm getting older, is I'm starting to think of it as if this is the gold rush, as the people who get it. It's kind of like that Satoshi Nakamoto quote. If you don't get enough time to explain it to you, it's like, for those here in the room, for those listening who get it, just keep stacking stats, doing your thing. You're going to have those people 20, 30 years from now looking for handouts and realizing they made a mistake. And I think the sad part about humanity is there's some people, P, that don't want to have that responsibility around, right? They want someone to tell them how to live, how to do that. Oh, I can make $250,000 a year, but I still may not quite make ends meet, but I'll have like some comfortable life and, make that choice. I'll take that choice. It's like, that's, where some people don't want that. They want that secure job. They just want to be told how to live. I don't know that goes away. I don't know that's the one thing that Bitcoin doesn't quite fix yet.
How dare you? How dare you imply that Bitcoin is I hate that trope. What have we not talked about? What is something that is super interesting to you that is keeping you up at night or that you are super excited about as it relates to the things that we've been talking about so far, or Bitcoin in general?
I'd say the war in like Ukraine keeps me up at night, and the possibility of what China might do with Taiwan, and how that might affect like trigger another sort of mini World War III. It's the economy is tanking because we have a land war in Europe, and we just haven't had that in like 70 years. No one really like we talk about it, but it kind of doesn't go away.
I know,
So
what a crazy concept. That was apparently, I mean, I was always told like no one fights land wars anymore. It's all
yeah,
cyber warfare and
yeah.
economic warfare.
But you know what? The one thing that is like a really, really interesting thing that's like a ray of hope for me that happened with the Ukraine-Russia war is I think there's a lot of really typical policymakers who are like, you know, kind of experienced. They've been in other administrations like Reagan administration, others before, and they're like, yeah, we can get our heads around this. We got one clear enemy on the battlefield. It's in Europe, you know, it's Zelensky versus Putin, you know, and that all makes sense. But then we don't live in that world anymore, though. And if you notice with Ukraine, one of the things that happened was all the raising of Bitcoin that they did to like help them for humanitarian reasons. Like in talking about a DAO, you know, what about crowdfunding a war, right? You know, I mean, like for the side that you want to win that war. This isn't like military leaders like France deciding they want to make sure the United States get a good start, so they intervene on behalf of the, you know, revolution, you know, to push England off. This is like just random people throwing out their Bitcoin, trying to sway the direction of a particular military conquest. It's crazy. And then you have people worried about Russia, and are they going to use Bitcoin, you know, to thwart the US dollar? And I think that to me, that showed me that we're on that like 3D chessboard P where things don't work the way they used to work. And Bitcoin has now reached the point in our society where governments are starting to figure out they have to deal with Bitcoin. And it's really, really scary. This is what keeps the part that keeps me up at night is what are they going to do? Are there going to be some reaction like China going to Taiwan for a lot of other reasons? But one of the reasons probably would be to shut down chip production. So that's not just about Bitcoin, that's about everything, right? And we're still not there with the foundries here in the US. So that and, you know, milk token, anything about, you know, the milk
Yes.
token and,
I love the
how
reference.
that's all going.
Deep cut. I've been trying to promote insect milk these days. Insects, you know, you've been told by the authorities that you can't milk an insect as they're not a mammal and they don't produce milk, but that's just a man trying to get into your head and prevent you from embracing the future of not only education but also nutrition. So,
I don't
Q.
see a nipple on the almonds that I milked this morning.
I'll send you a picture later. Q, you always have you have a different perspective on a lot of the stuff that we talk about here. You come at it from a more of a market focused and macro focused perspective than I do. I tend to like to, you know, live in a cardboard box under a bridge and just focus on the technology behind Bitcoin and you know, things like that. What are your thoughts from a macro perspective on what we've talked about with Jason so far?
I mean, if we've learned anything in the last 2 years, it's how much the government's decisions and, quite frankly, any branch of the government can impact the public markets and the economy at large. And I think there's a larger issue that sometimes, like in Bitcoin, we talk about a lot, and it's the control of the money supply. Like the US government essentially dictates and controls the entire world economy based on decisions it makes around their monetary policy, because every other country is tied to our monetary policy. It's just, it's fascinating to me because like the incentive structure around controlling money is to incentivize those who control the money to maintain control of the money. Like, that is the incentive right there. And it's literally just like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Every decision that gets made out of the government is like, I can't, and I challenge anyone to present one decision that has not been to self-serve the government and genuinely was to help the people. There's not a single decision historically that I could point to and say, this actually helped the masses, and this wasn't to help you, your agenda, your re-election campaign. Like, that system is what's broken. The two things I want changed are term limits for every single role in government. Even if you are appointed by the president, you have term limits, and remove the money from state. I think those two things solve a lot more problems than anything else. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just an idealist. I do fully believe that the free markets, if they were allowed to operate on their own, would correct, because like, if you have a bad product, people aren't going to buy it. And your product could just be the way you govern, or a phone or whatever. But if the free market decides that, hey, we don't like this product, we're going to move on to the next one, the market will continue, society will continue to move on. But in our current system, because there's so much money that gets tied up into everything, and it all goes back to the fact that this business was started off of a loan from the bank, and so the bank, more than anything, can't afford for this business to fail. And so as a result, you now have an extra incentive to find some way to like prop a bullshit business up that doesn't need to exist, and then it just like continues to survive and skirt on.
Yeah, one thing I think is interesting about that statement you made is, if you think about it, it's kind of like Thomas Jefferson concept of a revolution is good for government every 20 years or so, every now and then. So like, when you say term limits, and I'm thinking about it from the DC insider, but I'm like, yeah, that's something people have talked about, like term limits make sense. I could be down with that, get so much in trouble on these shows, but Nancy Pelosi, probably like, term limits, she could be monitoring her husband more, no DUIs, stuff like that. Anyway, but that's like, the term limits is like, that's like, yeah, so that's where I get myself in trouble. No, but term limits is something that's understood by the DC establishment. They're like, we get it. We need to, only maybe be in power for a little bit of time. But like, that quiet statement you just made, like, oh yeah, we just need to remove money from the government. It's like, oh yeah, we just need to take away all your power. Everybody chill. It's all good. Like, this is like a really big statement. And in a sense, if you look back to sort of the American Revolution, 1776, it was the same thing, right? They couldn't call it what you're calling it now. We can be more sophisticated. They wanted their own government, but what they really wanted was their own money, their own economy, right? What we've seen happen is the Jekyll Island experiment of the Federal Reserve, where you don't have money. We have Federal Reserve notes. And when you have the right amount, when you put the force of the government behind a system, which is really what we've sort of seen with the Fed, it's sort of co-opted this notion that we could create liberty and justice and democracy for all. So I think it's time for an upgrade. It's time, like Bitcoin is like the 2.0 of money of the United States. And it's time for us to sort of implement that in some way, shape, or form. I'll tell you, like, P and I really hit it off on Clubhouse when we started talking about the Bank of International Settlements, because it's so interesting to me the way they changed their strategy. Because originally it was they needed to ban Bitcoin. Now they need to create a CBDC to get rid of Bitcoin. But either which way, like, Bitcoin's no good. And I feel bad at times, P, that like we sort of dissed on Carstens and stuff. But what I don't understand is sort of like he's walked this road. He was in Mexico. He
I know, it's
saw
crazy.
hyperinflation, but he thinks the whole solution still needs to come from central bankers to solve that problem for them. And at some point or another, like, look, like, I don't know why he feels like he needs to dominate the world. We need to let some other people go ahead and take a step back and think about how we want to, regulate finance. And that's what's so nice about Bitcoin is it gives us this opportunity as like an experiment to kind of refresh where there isn't that economic opportunity, where you don't have that ability to invest in a company because of the way the rules have gone, where the dollar bills in your pocket, whether you're making $250,000 a year or making $250, a month, every dollar's value is based on what maybe 400 people decide to do with it at the Federal Reserve every year.
Well said.
I'm curious, Jason, and we will divert back to being a little bit more Bitcoin focused in a moment, but like I love having these type of conversations with people who are far more well versed than me perusing a bunch of left and right media outlets as well as independent journalists. But career politicians, like, I despise them. I'm curious, like, is there a necessity to have these villainous leeches involved in the future of society? Or, like, the reason I bring up term limits and my interpretation of the way the US government was founded was the idea that, hey, if a doctor sees something that's wrong, obviously I understand that doctors as a profession was not around in 1776. Nobody fucking say anything to me. I understand these things. But like, if a doctor sees an issue with the way there are policy structures around his work, he will close his practice, go into public policy to change those things because he understands it better than anyone else because he does it on a day-to-day basis. And then when those changes are done, he goes back to his practice. Same with the teacher, same with the police officer, etc. And yet we've deviated so far from that practice. And now it's just you have a Nancy Pelosi who's been in office truly my entire life. Or you have who's my state senator who's like senile Dianne Feinstein, who like literally has to be told what day of the week it is when she wakes up. Like, that's not a representation of me. Like, what? So I say all of these things just to genuinely like ask if there's a role for career politicians in the future. Like, what does that look like compared to today?
I think career politicians is just never what was intended. I think that like when we look at like Trump, like what is to me the motivation was always about how he wanted to kind of get into power, but I don't think he expected to sort of be where he is, right? Suddenly here he is. And it's interesting too, because like he now wants to come back and, is it ego? We're not really sure. It's kind of like we're in this period where there's a lot of these dynasty families that set things up, like the Kennedys. Now we're sort of going to see the Trumps and we've seen the Bushes. We'll kind of have this mentality of like, you'll be in power for 4 years and someone else will be in power for 4 years, as long as it's all controlled. I think that ultimately, though, like we need to put the idea of a career politician out to pasture, because I just think that to have them make those choices without the implications of what they need to do to get elected the next time would actually free them up to do so much more. It shocked me when I first started dealing with a lot of stuff in the policy, which I did like 5 years ago, to know Q, they spend like half their time fundraising. Like they go to Congress, they fly into Congress, they're in Congress, and they spend 4 hours a day, like on the phone, raising money for the next campaign. I mean, it shocks me that there's that. I don't know.
I went to school in DC. Like, most of my classmates work on the Hill in some capacity, and it's truly just a what are we doing for the next campaign? A lot more than it's like, what are we doing with the power we have today to make positive change and impact the communities that put us in these positions, which is, again, what it was designed to do. We just don't do that. And it sucks, but I don't know. I feel like I'm venting to a therapist at this point who agrees with me on everything. So I appreciate that. Jason, I'm gonna put you on the spot though, because we love a good tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, and I would love yours about Trump and Biden. And it's okay that you're not wearing pants. It's fine.
No, you had it wrong, Q.
Yeah.
Jason did us the incredible honor of putting on pants for this
That's
conversation.
fine. I full disclosure, I'm just in my boxers below, so like can't bring the camera lower.
It's all right. It's all right. It's not a. It's. I wouldn't even say it's a conspiracy theory, but it's something I thought about. It was very interesting. It was around 2016, 2017 when everyone was examining Trump and the Mueller investigation. So one of the things that came up in the Mueller investigation was the use of Bitcoin back in 16 by the Russians, right, to influence the campaign, the presidential campaign. And the truth is, Jared Kushner knows, how to use Bitcoin. And at one point, it's actually documented, he had to go to the Department of Justice because at one point, someone was literally doing a ransomware event on Kushner, saying if he didn't give up the tax returns of his father-in-law, of Trump, they would, he had to pay them Bitcoin to stop them from doing that. So back in 16, 17, we didn't really have a chain analysis, or everyone kind of realizes by now, hopefully everyone realizes by now, you move Bitcoin around, if you're a criminal, they're probably going to figure out where you've done it. And I'm not saying this and that it was a criminal activity, but is it really that far of a reach to say that if the Russians were using Bitcoin to influence the presidential campaign in 16, that at some point or another, some Bitcoin wasn't sent in the opposite direction? In other words, potentially by the Trump campaign to the Russians to influence certain things as a way of not having to, to pay off if in fact that was happening. So that's where we wear the conspiracy hats and the alarms all go off of, what's this guy talking about? But the interest I had in that is that the power of that Bitcoin of, number one, could it be tracked, or is there evidence of it being tracked? Because what never made any sense to me, and I mean, I don't know what your take on this is, but never made any sense why Trump was so anti-Bitcoin. Like when it came out, people were upset about Libra, right? But if you remember, and if you look at the timeline, I'm really not that crazy conspiratorially, because the next week was when one of the big things of the Mueller campaign was coming out, when he came out with this big constructed tweet about how Libra is worthless. There's nothing to do with Libra. Also, there's really nothing to do with Bitcoin. And when you have that feeling in your gut that something doesn't quite seem right, number one, I've never saw Trump construct such a well thought out tweet, explaining carefully why Libra is worthless and then why Bitcoin is worthless. The question was why? Why does he have to hate on Bitcoin? Well, if Bitcoin is worthless and no one does anything about it, it's kind of his way of saying Mueller doesn't have to look at it. Nobody's using Bitcoin. Forget about these Russians maybe using Bitcoin during the 2016 campaign. So, I mean, I have no proof whatsoever of any of this beyond just the Russians clearly did use Bitcoin in their ops, but it would be interesting to me, because we can track Bitcoin, if one day we could find a government official high up who sort of the smoking gun was their use of Bitcoin, thinking it's somehow not visible to other people. So, and that kind of changed my worldview a little bit too, to be honest, because I realized the power of this technology and how, and this goes exactly what you were saying before, Q. Sorry, not trying to point at you, but seriously, that's when you take the power of money away from the government, right? No one can manipulate that path of that money. And it goes to, Catherine Hahn, who now has her big Hahn fund and everything. But her start was with, the Silk Road, where we found some bad eggs in our own government who were trying to move money around. And they were able to go to a bank and suppress the transaction on the fiat side of the USD. But they learned very quickly they couldn't change the fact that they had walked off with some Bitcoin. And people were able to figure that out by doing analytics, that they had taken it literally from the crime scene. It wasn't like, oh, we just did a drug bust and, you, me, and let's say you're a Fed, I'm a Fed, and P's a Fed. We walk in oh, look, there's $6 million here. We found the drug money. I mean, $4 million, right, guys? Wink, wink. Like, you can't do that on the Bitcoin network. So to me, that just showed me like the power that I hope exists, where Bitcoin can really undermine the ability of any one politician trying to just rule the world and dominate for too long.
I love that. I love the reminder that like this is a public ledger. I have my own theory on why, not necessarily like politicians, although yes, he was technically the president of the country. Um, like there's a reason why billionaires don't like Bitcoin. There's a reason why ultra rich, super successful people don't like Bitcoin. Like Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett, they have benefited and taken advantage of and figured out how to make excess money and returns on the current system. And I think they are maybe not smart enough to realize like how vastly different the Bitcoin monetary system would a Bitcoin monetary system would look like, but they're smart enough to know that their practices and the way they built their wealth in the fiat system, it's highly unlikely that they could repeat that system in a more Bitcoin, far more public, far more transparent system. That's just my sort of rationale as to why someone like Trump and Hillary can only agree on one thing and one thing only, and that is their hatred of Bitcoin. I do want to, I don't want to like keep on hounding on the Trump of it all, but I do want to switch gears now to Biden. He had his executive order, I believe now 2 months ago, which was more or less a promise to explore cryptocurrencies and like better understand and create a report for congressional leaders to educate themselves on cryptocurrencies. You saw, or at least I saw, Gavin Newsom in California, more or less like it looked like me trying to copy the kid sitting next to me's homework in high school. He just took Biden's executive order, changed a few things around, wrote California instead of Congress. And then he passed that executive order for California to start exploring, learning, and understanding how to use blockchain technology. And then you're seeing today Biden coming out saying something about, well, we're going to release a bill around Bitcoin energy, Bitcoin mining energy usage. Potentially this is going to come out before Senator Loomis's proposed bill. I'm curious your initial thoughts on just those executive orders that were passed to explore and help Congress learn more about the crypto environment.
So let's go to a quick PSA for everybody. It's not Loomis, it's Lummis. Sorry, Q. You're she even has a thing, right? About Lummis.
Yeah, she hates it. It's Lummis like hummus. If you call her Loomis, she has a little knife that she carries around with her everywhere. She'll stab you. I learned the hard way.
No wonder she won't come on the show. Sorry, Miss Senator Lummis.
No, so look, you just broke news for me there, because I didn't know that the Biden administration had done that about cutting energy. I guess that must have been today, maybe the last couple hours or something, if not sooner.
I did not mean to put you on the spot. This is like a developing story.
No, but I did. I told Q, I was like, yo, ask the hard questions. Hit him with it.
Yeah. No, I love that. I just like called out Commissioner Benham at the CFTC for being too quick to judge Bitcoin energy. Within 2 hours, the White House is like, listen, we got to stop this energy.
Hold my beer.
Yeah. God, that's so crazy. I can't believe that they're doing that so quickly. Well, look, the Lummis Gillibrand bill is looking to like regulate the overall crypto markets. And I think, to be honest, you're seeing a little bit of a back and forth, because the executive order, Biden and digital assets, the one thing the senators from both sides said, meaning the Democrats, Republicans, have said is it's not up to the executive offices in the White House to like figure out what the legislation should be, right? So Gillibrand and Lummis are kind of introducing this bill to say that it should be the legislatures who legislate. People who've been elected, by the people in the House come up with the legislation. President either signs it or vetoes it. So there's a little bit of back and forth, I think, going on there. But it's an easy one for them to kind of go after. And I think it does trump a little bit of what Lummis and Gillibrand were trying to do. I find it a little frustrating. Lummis and Gillibrand have been, or Lummis particularly, has been working on this bill for about a year. While there might be some inherent problems in it, it's the first comprehensive bill to really clean up a lot of the activities that you were talking about earlier, Q. And if you want, I mean, I'm sure, I don't know, if you could probably get Tyler Lindholm from their office on your show, talk to him about it. He's the state rep, and now he works at Lummis's office. He won like Libertarian of the Year for like the Libertarian Party. He's a really great guy. And he talks about, though, this focus of the SEC and the Howey test and kind of getting out some of these things that just clearly are frauds, from the system. So there was a lot of positive, and I think that's still going to move forward, that Lummis-Gillibrand bill that they're rolling out officially next week. But this idea of the White House now, and yeah, I'll look into details of it, but of reducing energy, it seems like an easy win, but I don't know necessarily that all the facts are there with what they're trying to accomplish, because it strikes me more as something that Elizabeth Warren would do, not necessarily that the White House would do on it. So I'd love to see what scientific evidence that they've, come to the conclusion on. I'm sure it's been, vetted pretty carefully. So I'll pause there. I'd love to learn more about it. It is a surprise to me. I'm literally in a state of surprise that happened. That should not have happened. Basically, the plan was, like, we just heard a complete curveball. The plan was supposed to be, they were going to do some kind of stablecoin legislation. Everyone was going to go vote in November. But this makes it spicy, P. Now we got some serious stuff to talk about for the next few months over the summer, because the White House pushing the energy narrative on Bitcoin, leaning into it. It's a pretty big deal. It's a huge deal. Wow.
Do you think Bitcoin, or let me broaden the scope for a second and then I'll focus it. But first, do you think crypto is going to be a talking point either at these midterm elections or in the 2024 presidential race?
Yeah, I think it's already starting to become that. And we've seen Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX. He's the #2 fundraiser in the Democratic Party, short of George Soros. I really like when you shake your head, Chris. You get so excited. I feel like your hat's going to fall off. and that's like a good feeling. It's like a clap. Like there's no like laughter or applause here. Like it's not like a sitcom, but I get Chris going like that. Yeah. All right. So, look, I think that there is actually I don't even know what you asked me, but I'll say this. Basically, like what we have now with this Biden administration saying this about the energy is he's making it clear climate change is really critical to his campaign. He's always made that to his presidential election. Oh yeah, how this will come up at the midterms. This will be a talking point that comes up at the midterms. Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX, has put in more money next to George Soros into Democratic campaigns. So you're going to start to see this as a conversation piece. The biggest one, I think, is going to be about energy. And it's not because, I think it's only because it's the easiest one for people to break down. Like, oh yeah, use a lot of energy. Makes sense. Let's stop it. And it's kind of like the same thing. Like this is like the SUV of cars, when suddenly it was like you were shamed for driving a Hummer. Like now, if you have a Bitcoin miner in house, it's like you have your Hummer, or your big SUV that's gas guzzling. So of course you're having a Democratic administration that's coming out in a big way to kind of say, look, you got to stop this Bitcoin mining. You're destroying the world. You're destroying the earth. And then, I know people they like to believe the idea that Bitcoin's sort of this bipartisan issue, but I think this is where Republicans will come in and have to push back a little bit on this notion of stop trying to regulate this digital asset out over, this energy argument, so. I'm sorry, Chris, I didn't mean to pick on you about the hat. I don't know. Maybe
No, he loved it.
It must be time for my nap.
I
This has
just
been
want
awesome.
anyone who wants to criticize Biden's energy policy should just respond by saying his energy policy is malarkey.
Yeah, I think that like
You should drive down in your jalopy to the courthouse and file a motion.
I hate the even way I'm explaining that now, Pete, because it's like by saying that, it's like they're saying that Bitcoin miners are like the next SUVs. It's like admitting that Bitcoin is using too much energy, and that's the sole problem, right? We know there's renewables, there's
Exactly.
other. It's not apples to apples comparison either. I have given credit, and I will give credit to the Bitcoin critics with this conversation that is probably the best FUD of the decade. It has disrupted more things for Bitcoin by talking about the energy usage than I've seen. So it's sort of like Empire Strikes Back, like they did a good job, they chopped off Luke's hand. Like, we're all kind of retreating from this energy notion. And it's a problem. It really is. It's you see it affecting even today. It's like the Achilles heel for the industry right now when they bring this up. And we're still responding to it. We're not yet even offensively pushing our own agenda. It's
really hard because the ESG narrative and energy FUD is around Bitcoin and in general, but specifically around Bitcoin, is total horseshit. The problem is that it is based on, or rather, it ties into and hooks into these fallacious beliefs that so many people that are already very dominant in the US mindset. And so it's really hard to effectively kind of cut the legs out from under it, because instead of being able to say to somebody, hey, look, I understand where you're coming from. Here's why that doesn't make sense. You actually can't, it's very difficult to effectively do that when you're talking about the energy use of Bitcoin, because people's views on it are so warped. We were talking about this in a conversation recently where, there's so many facts that you can throw at somebody like, oh, hey, do you dry your clothes? Because clothes dryers in the United States use far more energy than the entire Bitcoin network. Do you use Christmas lights? Because Christmas lights just over Christmas use more energy in the United States alone than the entire Bitcoin network. The problem with those angles, which are true statements, is that people, they don't actually engage with them honestly. The issue is that people have been convinced that the usage of energy in general is fucked up, but they don't even care about their own interactions with that. And so it's really hard to basically you have to basically deconstruct someone's entire belief system around energy in order to effectively make them understand why Bitcoin's energy use is not an issue. And that's a very difficult thing to do.
The frustrating thing that I hate about this is like like to your points earlier on, what we were talking about is we had some really good threads there. Like, how do we fix the regulatory environment? There's some kind of solution, DAO, self-regulatory organization. The fact that there's people out there that are still stuck with these accredited investor rules, the hopes of Bitcoin. How do we clean up the highway so we have better rules on that highway and people aren't just speeding and there's like no enforcement? And that's what pisses me off, is that then we get in this, like, it's like blotted out by the sun. Now we're going to be talking about Bitcoin and energy for the next 2 weeks because we might see legislation about it. And all the other good stuff that we were just talking about kind of gets pushed to the wayside. So it's like a big distractor. And it's kind of boring too, at a certain level, right? I mean, is it really that thought-provoking that we need to like slow down the number of miners that we turn on? But I guess, it was probably inevitable. What worries me about the Bitcoin ESG FUD for us in this community and in general other things is when Bitcoin is winning, they find ways of doing these attack vectors on the digital asset that really has nothing to do with the value proposition of it, right? Bitcoin hands down is probably 1,000 times better than any CBDC ever would be. like, recently, the last like month or so, I've started to see articles in New York Post and others where they've done these studies saying that like people into Bitcoin are psychotic, right? They have the notions of psycho, real psychoanalytic problems.
I mean, I definitely am, but I think it's inappropriate to put that on everybody else.
Right, but that's like, and you talk about like why you don't like the government, Q. That's like, it's like the ultimate psyops, right? When you start trying to convince people that people into Bitcoin are nuts, and then all the people with like the traditional money are like, well, I want Bitcoin, but I just read those people are crazy. So like they're finding ways to kind of try to beat up Bitcoin, but not really do it in a fair fight, not just straight up say, we think US dollar is better than Bitcoin. Let's just have at it in the ring. It's all these
No,
periphery attacks.
it's that age old argument of like, if you can't, or the process in which lawyers argue a case, like if you can't win off of the facts of the case, you attack their um, credibility, and that's this entire calling us psychopaths. Like, I call myself a psychopath. I literally have gone on dates and like told girls point blank, like, if you're gonna date me, you need to know I am a genuine psychopath.
And this is why you are alone living in your mother's basement, Q.
You've met my girlfriend.
All right,
I met a person. I mean, she could have been a hired actor, bro. Facts are what you make them.
Did she ask you how your trade's going in a DM before you?
That is amazing. Honestly, I'm glad you didn't just trust.
Yeah. I can tell a paid actor when I see one.
Look, they're not called paid actors. They're called escorts. I really hope my girlfriend is not watching this episode. Hi, babe. I love you.
No, but you make a good point, Q. I mean, these are crazy times, and I think the ad hominem attacks will continue. And I said this before, but it's I use this in a different frame. I was talking about like shitcoins, but it's kind of like a DDoS attack, right? It's a denial of service attack on our brains, right? It is very distracting to have to constantly fend off all of these spurious and random and inappropriate and untrue claims that are made that are designed to discredit this thing, which is the most important asset that's ever existed. And it's one of the reasons, Jason, that I have so much respect and admiration for you. It's because like this is your full-time job. Like this is what you do. Q and I get on this podcast and just talk shit all day. You are one of the people who actually puts on your spelunking outfit and goes and fights the good fight in an area that most of us are just unable to contribute. So everyone can, I don't know. I think it's really important that everybody finds the thing that they are exceptional at and uses those abilities that they have to continue to support Bitcoin. So thank you is what I'm trying to say.
No thanks needed. Like I said, this is really a second chance in life for me of an opportunity of this amazing community of people who speak what I was thinking and felt like I was sort of on my own with thinking through back in 08 and 09. And I just feel like rode more by the US government and our financial system than like if something goes wrong or something fails, like there's this promise, but like really it's all about that we all have to believe the US dollar is worth a certain amount. And I think that's what Bitcoin has wedged itself into in a very painful way of recognizing, well, what is a fiat, dollar? When we look at the idea of fiat, right? Fiat is a declaration. It's like, I declare the, worth something. It's like the Knight's Tale, if you ever saw the movie Knight's Tale, where they, he gets the writs of he's a knight or whatever. It's like someone just decided, I'm going to say I'm a knight, and you get these papers, it's like, and we say it's worth something. And so what's exciting about the world we live in is we have the opportunity to challenge these beliefs. We have the opportunity to talk about it freely, like we do on this program. And, we, with the exception of Q's conversation later with his girlfriend, we're all safe. So.
Yeah, I love the Ben Bernanke interview. I think it was Ben Bernanke who was like, please, stop using the term fiat. It is offensive to me and my people. Don't use that word. It's unnecessary. I think that is hilarious.
And I will I will say, like, Ben Bernanke, we criticize these figures and everything, but I remember from like 08 and 09, I do understand where he was coming from in that financial crisis. And we have to think about this longer than like our own lifetimes, because with the Great Depression of the 30s, he was a real student of that. And the real problem in the Great Depression is there wasn't credit made available in markets. So everything seized up and everything was devastated. So when he talked about helicopter money, he said it's a Band-Aid, but he's like, this is what we got to do. So in a sense, if we want to try to evolve as humans, we can say, well, now maybe there's another solution than just printing money for money's sake, or just not giving out any credit. Maybe it's, the Bitcoin economy, it's the Austrian economics, and thinking through what is really valuable and how we want to live. And that's something that we're all going to have to kind of come to terms with, because the current course of our economy is not in the direction that it should be, right? We have way too much debt, the deficit. And that's what inspires me to keep going and to do the work that I do, P, is because I think of the opportunities I've had in life and been very blessed, but also where you have millennials and Z coming into an economy that's just been messed up, where it's the first time we're saying, the American dream really doesn't exist for the next generation. So maybe instead of becoming DeFi degens, we can find a way to have people see Bitcoin as the promised land. So.
Well said.
Jason, this has been awesome. P, thank you for introducing me to a new friend. Jason, truly looking forward to our next conversation where we pick things up and hopefully the powers that be don't fuck things up too bad for us. For everyone who's not already following you, where is the best place to stay up to date with everything that you have cooking?
Well, I've been rolling out Regulatory Jason more and more, which should make P happy. So you can find me at Regulatory Jason on Twitter right now. That's the best way. DM me there, and more to come.
Everyone should follow Jason. He's an incredible dude. Thank you so much, man.
You guys, the best. Thanks, P, as well. That's all.
We're going to cut to a quick commercial break, guys. But before we do that, do not forget, lock in your Bitcoin 2023 tickets. Ticket prices will be going up in about 2 weeks. I see you guys complaining about how ticket prices have already gone up. You snoozed. You lost. Don't snooze anymore. We'll be back after this commercial break. We're live. Oh, that was really hot. What's up, guys? I guess I'll just start off by saying, like, why haven't you bought your Bitcoin 2023 tickets? Like, the last time I saw you, I was telling you ticket prices are going to go up, and guess what? They went up by 1 sat. It's literally now 1 sat more expensive. So you fucked up, because I think the price of Bitcoin went down. I don't know. I'm just talking out my ass. Just buy the fucking tickets so that I can keep my job. You know the drill. Like, Chris and I literally will be out of a job. P has enough insect milk to keep him alive for generations, so he'll be fine. But help Chris and I live paycheck to paycheck off of our 6-figure salaries by buying a ticket to Bitcoin 2023. I can't do
And,
this
and
with a
guys,
straight face.
that's 6 figures in sats. So 100,000 sats only goes so far.
Yeah. Yeah, we got to talk
That's
about
what- wait,
your
You get 6
compensation.
figures a year of sats? I
Yeah,
only
dude.
get 5.
Oh, well, we might be cutting Q sooner than later, or because I'm more expensive.
No, that was an awesome conversation. Yeah, I mean, just diving in, like one thing that, Jason mentioned at the end is, he talked about how Ben Bernanke is a child of the Great Depression. And, as I certainly came to Bitcoin, or everybody, I got involved in Bitcoin building. I was building options and or equities trading bots and things like that. And then I was like, oh shit, what's this Bitcoin thing? It's volatile. People want to buy it. I'll fuck around with that. It wasn't until years later that I actually started to understand what Bitcoin really is and what it represents and why it is so important to the success of us as a species. But the idea that I say that because basically inflation was the main thing that made me realize that, right? As we came out of 2008, I graduated. I've told you this before, both of you, but I graduated from college in 2008 and was like, well, here's a dick punch. The economy is totally destroyed. Go fuck yourself, P. And coming out of that, seeing all this money printing really kind of changed the way that I think about central banks. But the reality is that if to what degree we can argue the specifics around, but if the government had printed no money, people would be destitute. We would probably be in a Great Depression. Now, I disagree with a lot of the specific implementation aspects of the quantitative easing and all the strategies that have been used to inject liquidity into the economy. But if we were in the shoes of the people who were making those decisions, we would probably do the same thing. Because on the one hand, you have printing trillions of dollars, which is insane, or you have the collapse of the global financial, economy. And I can imagine a world, and I'm being very charitable here, where, someone is in that position and the logic that they use could be sound. It's like, look, I can either collapse the world economy and be, responsible in large part for the deaths of hundreds of millions of people from starvation, whatever, or I can keep the party going. And again, nobody's actually thinking this, but I'm imagining a world where and I can sort of give people the opportunity to potentially find out about Bitcoin and get onto this lifeboat. Now, no one's really thinking of it that way, but even if they're not acknowledging Bitcoin as this lifeboat, it creates this opportunity for a slower decline and allows us to not have hundreds of millions of people in the U.S. alone starve if food production stops and shit like that. So I don't know. I kind of go back and forth about it, but it's a tough situation. What do you guys think?
You're not wrong to a degree. And where I think I differ from you is certain decisions. Let me start over and rephrase. We have this unfortunate habit that we're even bearing witness to today with certain decisions or certain policymakers saying or doing things that are, in hindsight, the wrong thing to have done. And they just issue an apology if we're lucky. But then there's nothing else. There's no, hey, you know what? We're going to take this decision-making power away from you. Or, hey, you should probably go to jail because you did some pretty fucked up things that, if we didn't stop, would have led to millions of families being homeless. Like, or just plainly, you're fired. Like, none of that has ever happened.
For sure. I'm painting with an extremely broad brush.
Like,
I am definitely not.
And we have to.
Like,
we kind of have
central
to with
bankers
this
are good.
topic. Like, I got to look it up, but there was an interesting documentary on HBO that showed the perspective from the lenses of the bankers and Bernanke, and who's the other guy, Chris, that was...
Paul Volcker?
No, that worked with Bernanke in 08.
I know, I can see him.
He's a bald guy, the bald
Yeah.
white guy with glasses. Him. Those two are like the main subjects of this documentary, where they talk about sort of what was happening, and essentially they brought in all these other banks, like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, every other bank that everyone was like pissed. Hey, they got bailout money from the government, and then their CEOs got their biggest bonuses ever, like literally one after the other. And like the aesthetic of that looked terrible. But in this documentary, Bernanke and this other guy point blank say that they told all of these bank CEOs in this meeting that if you walk out of here without signing this document that we've given you, essentially saying, we'll give you this money, so that what is happening to the banks that have been getting unwound, what just happened with, there was a bank in England that the unwind really started happening to first. I want to say it was Barclay. And essentially they were like, look, this is going to happen to you. You may not see it, but we see it happening to you. And if you walk out of here without taking this money today, we will not give you this money, and we will let you fail next time. And so they were pushed to take that money, and in their eyes, they did not see, like, essentially the US government in that instance almost, like, what's that old, there's like that old sci-fi concept of like cops stopping someone before you commit the crime because you thought about the crime, and then you're muted, P.
Fuck. I meant to say, I was saying, like, you mean the precogs from Minority Report?
Well, dude,
Precognitive crime.
Like, spoiler alert, but like it was truly the main theme and battle in the new Marvel series, Moon King or Moon Knight. Like, it was genuinely like two different gods. One of them would just like kill people who did bad things. The other one would kill people who were eventually going to do bad things. And in this instance, the US government tried to stop the banks before what they thought would happen happened. But in actuality, the banks didn't think that was going to happen. And so they still think they're in the right, and the way that they have operated was fine. So you kind of like...
Well, I think we're lumping it all together.
These banks should have been allowed to fail.
Oh, I totally...
Like,
I think that
they should have, because then they would have learned.
It's a broad spectrum, though.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. Like, in my opinion, the fact that basically, like, the people who were responsible for the financial collapse, they got off scot-free. And it was especially gutting because it was, for me... I was someone who voted for Obama. I was like, yeah, like, he's going to change everything. He's like, his whole campaign promises were around like ending Guantanamo Bay and like all this shit and like holding people accountable and blah, 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 blah. He took office and it was like, oh, just kidding. Guantanamo Bay stays open. The great financial crisis, like, free pass. So there's a broad, that's a separate thing, but that was gutting. And it was like, oh man, fuck, like everything I thought I knew was bullshit. But the people who were responsible and who created the great financial crisis, those people should have gone to jail. They should have been held accountable, and they weren't. And that was totally fucked up. And as you said, it incentivized people to do that kind of thing going forward. It was like what Jason was talking about, right? It's like everybody's kind of like eyeing everybody else. And it's like, oh shit, you're going 150 miles an hour? Well, shit, dog, then I'm safe. I'm definitely safe going 145 and whatever it is. And so those people should have, been drawn and quartered. But the decisions, and those are separate decisions that were made from like, where do we go from here? Or like, like, how do we prevent people from starving? I think. I don't know.
Let me ask you this though, and I'm gonna cheat a little bit and assume you've seen The Big Short.
I have indeed.
So, okay, so
every
like,
night before
based on
before I
that,
go to
like,
bed. And then I
grouping
scream,
of characters,
Satoshi.
the general grouping of the characters. Like, my favorite character in that movie is Steve Carell's character, because he literally goes,
Obviously,
like flies down to Florida and sees the credit unwind happening in real time, and then like he goes and like, oh, fuck, who's the I forget the actor's name, but he plays Schmidt in New Girl, and he's the one like bragging about like, oh, I just fucking got this person and this person and this person, and like I just sold this stripper her third house, blah blah blah. And then the stripper is like coming to realize like she's about to get, pun intended, but not in that way, like she's about to get fucked when all of her mortgage payments quadruple in 3 months time. So is it these, like, what is the right angry adjective here?
Assets.
No, like they're conniving, shysting like sharks, like those people who underwrote the mortgages? Or is it the banks themselves for allowing those mortgages to buying up those mortgages? Because there's two guilty parties there. It's the people who wrote the mortgages and the banks that thought that, oh, it's fine, it got graded poorly, but like that poor grade doesn't matter. Like they're a D student, but like, you know what? They were probably a B student, and like, whatever, bro. Like those are the two most guilty parties in my opinion. I'm curious what your opinion on like who is that guilty party, because that's where we needed to focus our efforts and where we need to be paying attention to avoid that or to have stopped that. And I think unfortunately the systems that were put into place, and yes, I'm speaking from a place of hindsight, from my parents' basement without a worry or care in the world, but like the '08 financial crisis affected my family a great deal in a very rocky and uncomfortable way. But like we didn't go to the root cause of the issue. We just put a Band-Aid over one of the symptoms of the issue. Is the point that I'm trying to make. And I'm trying to like, what I want to uncover with you guys is like, what actually was causing the sickness? What caused this entire system that was seemingly working like for 50 years up until that, no, 40, like, right? 39 years.
I'm going to steal a line from Greg Foss. I was actually going to bring up both, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the movies now. Not Inside, The Big Short and Panic is a better documentary. It's a more serious documentary instead of Hollywoodized, of the old untold story of 2008 financial crisis. Christina Lagarde's in there a bunch, and actually they show a clip of her trial, Christine Lagarde, of her actually getting her indictment and then not going to jail, which is pretty funny.
Oh yeah. Yeah, 100%. So again, I do want to separate these things out.
Is Panic on HBO? Because I think that's the documentary I was talking about.
I think it is. Let me look.
I texted my friend who told me about like, oh, I'm trying to see if that's the one.
So wait, I want to be clear.
Yes, it is.
People like Christine Lagarde.
Panic is the documentary that I was talking about as well. Available on HBO. Everyone should go watch it because you really start to uncover and understand from the perspective of the Fed why they made certain decisions. I personally, however, have not justified it. To me, it is putting a Band-Aid on a symptom instead of going for the root cause.
Yeah, I want to be clear. The people that do terrible things should be held accountable. Christine Lagarde is a literal criminal who was convicted and was basically just like, yeah, but I mean, you're Christine Lagarde, you're a central banker, like, you know, you feel bad, right? And she was like, maybe. And they were like, good enough, you're free to go. Like, that's fucking bullshit, right? That's separate though from the people who were trying to clean up the mess of it. And there's a lot of shit that should have gone very, very differently. And again, like my personal economic future was, you know, crushed and ground into meat paste and then fed to, you know, many central bankers and people who were bailed out. That's fucked up. I'm just pointing out that, like, I mean, I sound like a fucking broken record. It all goes back to the incentives, man. And I'm saying we would make the same decisions as separate from the people who fucked shit up and they should be held accountable and weren't, from the people who were trying to basically being like, oh shit, like where do we go from here? Like everything's fucked. I'm not the person, prosecuting whoever it was. I just have to basically like try to figure out how to not force, hundreds of millions of Americans to start eating cat food. I know I talk about cat food a lot. It's because it's real tasty, and everybody should try it at least once. Just saying, don't try cat food. Anyway, news and notes. What we got? What are the breaking stories?
I don't feel like we've talked this ad nauseum. Like, what? Like, what would you have
the
done?
horse is dead, but I want to beat it further.
No, like the horse is still kicking, man. It's still kicking. Like, what genuinely would you have done? Like, look, I
think I guess I agree with P that like I'm not happy the way it had to be done, but in the movie they do a pretty good job saying like if the banks didn't take the money, there's a really good fact that the people that they still got harmed regardless. But imagine going to cash in your check on Friday and the banks are locked because they're out of money because they're bankrupt. Like that affects the everyday, 9-to-5 workers, the construction workers, the police officers, the pension funds, the teachers that are like, what do you mean I can't cash out my check? They're like, oh, well, the bank's gone. It's very weird. Like we talk about, obviously bank accounts are FDIC insured. What is it? 500,000, 250,000. I forget what it is.
250K per account.
Per account. So, but what's that look like if the bank is out of business? Like if there's no one there to give you your money, if there's no one there to fill the ATM machine, like what does that actually look like? So I think that's kind of the point that we were at. To exactly P's point, no one went to jail. They're able to do this whole big Ponzi based on lowering interest rates that they got very lucky. Max Greenfield was Schmidt's character in The Big Short, and he was bragging about, I just sold this, adjustable rate mortgage, and she didn't have to fill out anything for income. I just like approved her for mortgages and stuff, and it's just very absurd. But I think it's in a very rough position. I don't think we should have ever gotten there in the first place. But that's another thing that dates back to the 70s when they really started, or early 80s when they started this, adjustable rate mortgages and basically, anti-discriminatory laws which is like good. I mean, I would hope that people can get houses, but when you do that with no risk or no counterparty risk, quote unquote, and they could just take out loans out the wazoo, that's what kind of led to this whole unravel.
I'm nodding vigorously.
Q, what else do you got?
My gardener outside. I don't know if that noise is coming through or not. I apologize. Take the mic away from me for a second. All right.
Yeah.
He's gonna go beat the gardener outside to death. Okay, what do we got in terms of news? Chris,
I think the big one that we're staring at is obviously the Biden administration through a Bloomberg article is saying they basically want to regulate the energy consumption of Bitcoin. That's kind of just the layman's terms. It's Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, basically attacking proof of work cryptocurrencies and saying that they want to regulate how much energy they use. Pete, I guess, do you want to chime in there?
Unfortunately, I have not read the story in detail, so I would kind of just be talking out of my ass, which I'm happy to do. I do it all the time. But I'm going to go try to read some of the details. Are there any like specific quotes, interesting pieces of it? Or Q, I noticed you're back. That was very fast. Have you read the article, or have you read information about this, and can you comment specifically on it?
Only from the depths of my butthole. Yes. I'm in the same boat as you. I did not read the article. I actually wanted to talk about the letter that Professor Robert Whaley sent to the SEC. This is the man who created the VIX.
Let's start there then.
All right, let's do that. Like, this letter has been circulating online. I'll post it on my Twitter. We'll post it in the chat as well. But it's a very interesting piece because it's not necessarily coming out. Like, the point of this is the man who essentially created the VIX and a couple of other indices for stock markets that are still used to this day. He's a professor at Vanderbilt. Essentially wrote this letter detailing why GBTC's current, I actually don't know what it's considered properly, what GBTC is, but they've essentially put in a bid and a request to the SEC to change what they are now, which does not exist in the US market. So I think the one in Australia did end up passing, if I'm correct. Or did it not pass? Regardless, they're
Canada certainly has an ETF.
The main thing I think from this that I took away that I thought was really, really interesting was actually, like, if you just go to the last line, his conclusion, he essentially he says that this would be the most transparent ETF on the market. I'm going to read the exact quote. He gives three main reasons, saying the XBX stuff, I'll explain that in a second. Bitcoin spot market is vastly deeper and more liquid than the Bitcoin futures market. Yeah, no shit. You're talking about a $600 billion market cap asset where none of the futures ETFs even like are dropping up in the bucket compared to the actual scale of the entire market. So no shit. And then C, the product structure is much more transparent and well designed. That's just by the nature of the fact that the Bitcoin blockchain is a public ledger and everyone can see all the transactions. So all of a sudden you can't actually have these like weird sketchiness. It would actually be the purest ETF on the market. And I think that line in particular sends me a signal, at least. And this is my anti-government conspiracy theory signal blaring, saying that like the reason why the SEC doesn't want to approve this ETF is they actually realize like it would be too transparent. And then it would start to unravel a lot of other ETFs that maybe don't have the best practices in place, but were already approved. And the SEC doesn't want to have to roll those back as a result. So I thought that was it's literally like not even a whole line. Like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 words. But to me, those 10 words have the biggest implication on all, and to me send the signal of why the SEC actually doesn't approve this ETF. And I think it's really, really interesting because you would introduce like real Wall Street investors to how the blockchain itself operates and how a free market money moves. And then you will have a lot of people asking the same question that I did when I first started to understand Bitcoin, which is, wait a minute, time out. You're telling me there are only 21 million and there can never be any more? So you're telling me supply is fixed and demand is essentially, like, you can measure demand in a variety of ways, but it's at its core is adoption. Like, that will click in every financial investor, finance person, in their brains. That will click so quickly, and it's over at that point. Like, selfishly, there's a degree where I worry that happens and it shoots the price of Bitcoin up so much so fast that the everyday person, which Bitcoin was created for, isn't going to be able to benefit off of Bitcoin in the same way, because all of this big money is going to come in, buy up as much Bitcoin as you can, and then we're almost back to square one, which is where we're at with the current fiat system, in my opinion. So I think it was Foss who made the bold, someone that we had on the show made the prediction that like the second you get a spot ETF in the US stock exchange markets, Bitcoin is worth $500,000 a coin. So there is another side of this coin to consider. The real crux, or not crux, but the real point of this letter that was written was not necessarily to explain what a spot ETF in Bitcoin would look like, but rather to explain to the SEC that essentially the source for the data, and the data being the price of Bitcoin that GBTC sources versus the BITO, the ProShares Bitcoin future-based ETF, that one has a different source of data. And he spends a good chunk of this letter essentially explaining how the data sources of both of these, for both of these products, are so similar that the difference is negligible. And that if you were willing to allow a spot futures ETF or Bitcoin futures based ETF based on this data, that you should also be willing to offer a spot ETF based on this other data. That is the whole point of this letter. So there's a lot of like technical jargon, a lot of conversations around just like summary statistics and statistical analysis of these two data sets, which I found very fascinating. Uh, just having a background and understanding of data analysis, but to like an everyday reader, like none of this is going to make sense. So there's that's the point of this letter, and I think it's very fascinating that it's not necessarily to say or justify the spot ETF, but rather to justify the data the spot ETF would be using, and essentially creating an argument around you've approved this other data source for a different type of ETF that is far worse for the public markets in general than what a spot ETF would do for the public markets. And the data source for this is identical. So it's a very interesting argument. The final point that he makes is just the liquidity in general and how the spot ETF liquidity market would be vastly, vastly greater than what you have now in the futures market. Kind of a no-brainer, but that's just, I don't know, my 2 cents on it. I don't know if either of you guys, A, did anything I say even make sense? B, did either of you have a chance to read it?
I was able to skim some of it, and it was a very comprehensive article for sure. Someone made a great point. They're like, how many letters do they need to receive in order to approve something like this? And then someone in the company was joking, like, how many people need to get rugged from all these other scams before they, approve a Bitcoin one, but they keep denying, like, I don't know. It's just funny that, they keep denying this ETF, but they'll gladly let these other things go on and not stop them. So
I don't have an informed opinion, unfortunately. I think it's interesting. There's a lot of people that there's definitely something weird going around in the U.S. around the approval or non-approval of an ETF around Bitcoin. I don't understand it. I think it's interesting. One of the conspiracy theories that I have heard bandied around, which I don't have an opinion on, is that that this is like an attempt to give people more time to buy Bitcoin, which I don't think is true, or that it is, if an ETF is approved, as you said a second ago, it will drive up the price of Bitcoin because it will create, in theory, more paper Bitcoin, but that will allow the market to be manipulated in the same way, in theory, in the same way that the price of gold currently is, right? And that instead of people trading actual Bitcoin, they will be trading the ETF of Bitcoin, which does not necessarily, is not necessarily connected one-to-one to actual Bitcoin being held somewhere. There's ways of obfuscating that and getting around it. And so I think that's an interesting idea. But again,
yeah, and Q, I don't know if you mentioned this while you're talking about it, but I know the SEC has to make a decision on Grayscale's ETF or their application by July 6th. So coming up quite literally almost a month from today. And if they don't, so there's two options. Well, there's three options. They can either approve it, they can deny it, or they can submit for an extension. If they do either of the latter two that I mentioned, whether they deny it or submit for an extension, Grayscale said that they are going to sue the SEC. This is just kind of what they're claiming, that, they're harming retail by not doing this, or just normal investors. So I think that's very interesting. It's not too often that you see companies or corporations suing the United States government, but it would be definitely a very interesting lawsuit and case for sure. We can circle back to the one article. I can just give my 2 cents because I did read the article on it. I was just kind of taking your thoughts before we moved on to your article that you were talking about, Q. So I'll just give you the highlights of it. Basically, like, the Biden administration says crypto miners, specifically referring to proof of work miners, are very costly and harmful to the environment. And it says it threatens the US's climate goals and strains the power grid. And then I want to publish that or talk about this one excerpt that was from the article. It was an article from Bloomberg. Basically, it says this study, and it quotes the study published last year, found mining in the region pushed up monthly electric bills by about $8 for households and $12 for local small businesses. Local government tax revenues increased from the mining development, offset only about 15% of the hike costs of local to the locals. So it's saying 85% of the costs attributed to the increase in price of energy is due to the increased mining activities in that area. And I just want to say that's really wrong, and it's not an apt comparison. It's basically comparing, it's saying, oh, they started mining Bitcoin, so the cost of energy went up, and it's because of Bitcoin mining that the cost of energy went up, which is just completely wrong. I've said a couple times that I'm an engineer by degree, and in my previous occupation, I was at a waste energy company. And even in the last year before joining Bitcoin Magazine, I was in procurement. So I was specifically looking at things as they come into the plant as we were buying. And I know costs of everything from 2020 and 2021. I mean, raw materials were up anywhere from 100 to 300% over the last 2 years that I was there. Parts that you could normally get in 2 weeks would take 12 to 16 weeks. If you wanted them to expedite, it was additional shipping and handling costs. Plants that I was operating at, or the facilities that we were running, are 30 to 40 years old. Maintenance for many of the vendors, we're seeing price increases for the labor alone at 15 to 25%. Steel shortages were causing prices to go up. Generators, pumps, and tanks, all that we would normally get, saw increases of 50 to 200%. So just equating that Bitcoin mining caused the price increase is just very disingenuous and not an honest argument or assessment of the situation at all. You know, coming from the guy I was doing the purchasing for the plant, and it wasn't just from Bitcoin mining. Not saying that we were doing it, but obviously it would be a CapEx project, and then you could be, taking the Bitcoin and sell it back to the network. But yeah, it would not be solely based on Bitcoin mining alone that would cause the price increases. The price increase of everything was going up, maintenance, you name it. I don't know what your thoughts are there, if you guys have any questions on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's totally bullshit. I mean, it doesn't surprise me that these claims are being made. The narrative attacks against Bitcoin are only going to increase in ferocity as more and more money is printed because, as Lagarde said, we got to prevent the people from using the off ramps. And the most effective, attacks against something as compelling as Bitcoin are going to be ones that, again, anchor into existing fears, existing belief systems, because those are the hardest to discredit and to disassemble so that people can actually see what's going on. So I think we're going to just see more and more of this kind of thing. Again, I feel like I was like, oh, thank you, Regulatory Jason, for being, the regulatory Jesus. And I honestly, I couldn't be more appreciative, because there are so many people, many people that we've had on the show, Joe Carlosari, Jason, who are willing to put in that time. And I appreciate it so much, because it's something that I do not have the attention or the mind for, or something, but it's so important, right? It's so easy for so many Bitcoiners to be like, the politics doesn't matter. Like, Bitcoin is inevitable. Everything's going to happen. It's not inevitable. There are these, or certainly not within our lifetimes, maybe on a long enough time scale. Yes. But there are so many battles that need to be won in order for us to save as many people as possible with this thing that is Bitcoin, that, we got to kind of attack it from all angles. And I think that these types of conversations, discrediting and disproving these types of falsehoods is just one of the many battlefields that we're fighting against, the people who want to keep us all financially enslaved.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. They're fighting the good fight. I could never mess with politicians or pander to politicians in the way that, Jason and Joe and even Grant or David Zell, it's just
Lummis and so many others,
Yeah, exactly. It's just crazy.
But I think one thing I'll say is that the takeaway is not, we're talking about politics because we were just talking about it, but the thing is, there are, as I said, there are so many different battlefields that one can move forward on and can take this fight to, right? There's the technical aspects of this. There are improving the Bitcoin protocol. There are, creating educational resources. There are so many different things that every one of us can do to support trying to expose and bring Bitcoin to as many people as possible. So that would be the main takeaway that I think for people listening. It's like everyone can contribute to Bitcoin if you want to, and figure out what that thing is that you can do and help to do it. I feel this moral imperative to like get Bitcoin into as many hands as possible, as rapidly as possible, because I feel like we're on the deck of the Titanic and some people are just playing the music and I'm like, get the fucking lifeboat. It's right over here. You could fit.
There was more than enough room. Full transparency. I've never seen Titanic, but there was enough room for Jack.
But I already slipped into
that's
the ice
some
water.
greedy ass shit right there. Like, fuck, scoot over a little bit. You claim to love this man. Like, there's plenty of room on that. Just saying.
Has a more perfect analogy ever been discovered about Bitcoin than the scrap of wood that Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio were on? I think not, Q. I think you've done it.
Right? Like, that piece of wood is control of the monetary system. Kate Winslet is the federal government.
She's Christine Lagarde.
Okay, fine. It's Christine Lagarde. And Leo is Satoshi. Leo is Bitcoin, man. Like, come on.
That would imply
Here's
they
the fucked
died.
up part.
That would imply they died, though. So it can't be Satoshi.
No, I get that, but I'm trying to rewrite the ending where I'm saying, like, look, let's be fully transparent here. Like, do you really think that Kate Winslet's character like floated off and lived in freezing cold temperatures when all you have is like a door and you're like a rich hoity-toity girl who like has had everything handed to you? Like, I'm sorry, but you also died. No, I'm giving you what the post-credit scenes of Titanic would be from the perspective of someone who's never watched Titanic. And in the post-credit scene, like after Jack has like long died, Kate Winslet's character, like I don't even know the name of her character. That's how, like, I want to further emphasize this. I've never seen this movie, but she's also going to die. So understanding then that
what do you think the plot of Titanic is? Can you just give us like a 10-second summary?
What my synopsis of Titanic is, someone who's never seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Poor guy falls in love with rich girl, and then the boat sinks.
Nailed it. Fuck.
I mean, that's spot on.
That's a 4-hour movie that all you idiots got dragged into watching, and I still have that 4 hours of my life for now.
I just want to show you one thing. I have a defunct Instagram account that only has one post that I use just for communicating with people who are insane and only use Instagram to communicate. And the only picture on my account is this one. Oh fuck, you can't see it. God damn it. Hold on. It's a work of art. There we go.
That's incredible.
Yeah, this is a real picture. This is not something that I edited.
Oh my God, that's so creepy.
Yeah. You're welcome, America.
Thankfully, P always, just gives us the thing that will make sure we can't sleep at night.
That's what I'm here for. I have one job. All right, what else we got?
Q, you got anything else?
Oh, yeah. Use promo code FOMO. Get 10% off of everything in the Bitcoin Magazine store. Boom. There was someone getting yelled at. Oh. Okay. This is something that hasn't been brought up. I don't know if everyone's seen it. My laptop's going to die, so I got to just lob this up before I'm trying to find it. Robert Breedlove is exploring shitcoinery.
Again, motherfucker. Wait, is this what? Give us the context. Give us the scoop.
So hang on. I am not promoting BitClout. I'm not shilling a shitcoin. No, I was not paid for this post. Yes, I am looking at non-Bitcoin project without inquiry. How can anyone make a determination about anything? Condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance. he essentially said this as a response to a lot of people responding to his earlier tweet saying, would love to hear what the free market thinks about BitClout. I'll be taking a look at it over the next week. The first non-Bitcoin project I've looked at in a while.
Wait.
Link.
This is old. This is from. Is this a new thing or is this? BitClout is that was the thing that.
You're
that
right.
Was
this is from 2021, but it started coming up on my timeline. Like a lot of people are like pulling up receipts on Breedlove. I was
that's old. That's old news. He tried to BitClout and he got fucking wrecked for it. Maybe there's something new, but I haven't seen anything yet.
Okay, fair. I kind of want to keep going down this like shitcoinery path for a little bit, just like calling people out though. So like with what happened with Solana, and I got to keep an eye because at a certain point I do have to plug this computer in. Like I now sent that clip from the All In podcast where David Sachs and Chamath are bragging about their Solana positions. Like I sent it to Mackenzie Sigalos. Like while we were on with her, like I even brought up, I'm like, you need to look into that. Like Solana was just a bunch of insiders, and you have like these billionaires literally bragging about how they were just given free Solana that's now worth $1 billion USD, and like how they're unwinding and essentially dumping it on retail. It's fascinating that like,
yeah,
if I get in trouble for disclosing how much I've actually made in fantasy football versus them not getting in trouble for that when both of these things just happen on a public podcast, like
it's interesting too. I mean, Q, I think you bring up a great point. I don't know why they'd be shilling it aside from maybe trying to shill their bags. But even then, they're billionaires. They would attract the interest, or at least I know Chamath is. I'm not sure about David Sachs. I think he is, or close, 100 millionaire, whatever. That would definitely, I feel like, attract a regulator like the SEC to go after someone like them. If you have a couple $100 or $1,000 in a random cryptocurrency, I don't think that they would care. But yeah, they would definitely go after, a big fish in order to try and get money from them. Although it's very interesting, I don't know. Obviously, they'd want USD payment. They don't want the Solana payment because it's worthless right now because the network's down, I believe, still.
It's still down?
I think they were trying to restart it, but I don't pay too much mind to it. I can look into it. But
guys, I have an argument. I think Soylent, or I don't even know the fucking name, the shit token formerly known as Solana, has been living rent free in our heads for the last week or so. We've mentioned it too many times on this stream. This is my personal belief. My name is P, and I approved of this message.
And now back to our show.
Look, it sucks. It's bullshit. So many things are.
Now let me ask you this. Is it the people that created Solana? Is it the investors that helped prop Solana up higher and really made a lot of money on it? Or is it the exchanges that let retail get rug pulled? Like who? I just want to know, who do I take my torch and pickaxe and stand in front of their house? Like whose house do I need to go to?
I am not as intense about like, everything should be a free market, I think, as some, but I tend to lean that way in most situations. I think the thing that I hold, that I have a problem with is the false claims around Solana. I will rail against those, and all shitcoins, incessantly and unceasingly. But I think people should be able to do whatever the fuck they want with their own money. And I don't like to like moralize things like that. Like I think like the whole idea of a free market is like people are gonna try to fuck people over. That's how a free market works. And it is the individual's responsibility to put money into things that are reasonable and good and make sense, or to find people who they trust for good reason and trust their opinions. But yeah, I think the answer here is hold individuals should be held accountable for making their own decisions, not we should regulate, the Solanas and everything else more. I don't think that's the answer. So my short version is, I also think that it is 100% within our purview and reasonable for us to shit talk everyone who is involved and tell them to go fuck themselves. That's how a free market works, right? Like, we get to say whatever the fuck we want. We get to call them scammers, tell them to eat glass, put their head in a bag, put their head in the oven, whatever it is, drown themselves in a river. We get to say that. And just as they get to say, like, we're scammers, like, go fuck yourselves. We're doing what we want. So
yeah,
I think we can yell about it, but I don't think anybody, I say this, I'm painting with, again, an incredibly broad brush. Like, I don't actually care enough to like know the very specifics of, other than like at the high level protocol level of the Solana scam. So like, if there are things, like if people got super fucked over and there are specific laws that were broken, like, yeah, sure, prosecute those. But in general, I think that
What about, all right,
people are going to gamble.
Fine. So P wants to let the Solana scammers walk. Okay. Like, I guess.
No, I think the market should punish them. I think everybody should be like, yo, you fucked us. You are never going to work in this town again. You're on the blacklist. And, your house, whatever. I don't know.
So let me ask you this then. Like, I don't hate the idea of, like, if you, like, the idea of regulating around scams, to me, like, is inherently flawed, because in my opinion, regulators are the biggest scammers of them all.
Yeah, exactly.
So like, I buy this argument, and then I'm going to steal like some thoughts and ideas from the sovereign individual. And the thought I want to steal and build off of here is the reason central planning of governments really came to be is the need to protect property. And so where does a scam fall in the line of, are you losing property and require protection, or are you just a fucking idiot and didn't do your own due diligence? In which case, like, I don't fucking care about you. Like, if you didn't do your own due diligence, that's on you. I spend hours researching stocks that I may never buy because I was doing due diligence. Like, so where do you think that, like, this, a scam, like a crypto scam, where does it fall on the spectrum of, is this a property to a degree that's being stolen or taken away from you because, hey, like, Bitcoiners believe that Bitcoin is digital property, and if you're going to Richard Hart, you're giving him your Bitcoin and ETH for pictures of him driving around in his car that says Tiny PP. So like, is that protected under the eyes of, like, hey, this is property and therefore I need protection of my property, and central planning has turned into that protector of property? Or is this just a lack of intelligence? In which case, like, I'm sorry, but we're too stupid as a country as a whole to supplement stupidity. Like, we can't afford that, if I'm being quite honest with you.
It's a reasonable question. I don't have a black and white answer for you. I think that the question is, like, if you take actions that make yourself cogently and of your own free will that put you into a dumb, stupid position, like, that's something that you did to yourself, like, but I honestly, it is a reasonable question, and I actually want to think about it a little bit more and, like, figure out, like, okay, put out all the possible scenarios, and, like, when does it become a scam that the government should regulate against? I actually haven't spent enough time thinking about it to basically say anything other than, something random. But I think it warrants more than that. To be clear, fuck Solana, fuck everyone that was involved in it, and
But like I battle with this question sometimes where like Bitcoiners who are very freedom oriented sometimes like to tell people like, oh, you shouldn't spend your money on that. But like, if we want to be real for a second, like that's antithetical to the idea of freedom.
no,
Like
but
you, just because you think you're smarter than someone doesn't give you the right to tell someone what to do. But then I think answering this question, and maybe it's something for us to think about, and I'll represent it tomorrow because it'll just be us tomorrow on the stream. I hope you guys will all join. We may or may not go outside depending on CK and Alex's mood. But other than that, like, I think we need to, in Bitcoin, start answering these hard questions for ourselves because I think it will help us better understand where we need to spend time, effort, and energy. And if it comes down to us realizing and accepting like part of ultimate freedom means giving idiots the freedom to invest in stupid things if they see fit, and that is a part of freedom. That is a part of real financial freedom.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay,
I don't think we disagree.
Fine. They're pulling the mic from me, so I'm telling you both right now. I'm literally gonna first thing. I'm not even gonna be like, and I'm joined by my co-host P. Like, how you doing today? No, it's gonna be like, all right. Is a scam protected under the idea that you are stealing property, or is it a scam and you're just an idiot and you're on your own? Like bright and early tomorrow morning. I hope you tune in. It's going to be an intense discussion and debate. Let us know what you think. Like, we'll present this question on Twitter as well and like have you guys chime in, throw it in the chat, like what you think. As always, buy a ticket to the Bitcoin conference so I can keep my job. I really like my job and would like to keep it. So like, feel free to like write in a note. The reason I am buying this ticket is because of Q and not P. That would be greatly, greatly appreciated.
Fair.
And of course, use promo code
FOMO. My heart is pure.
I'm not. I'm just trying to keep my job, man. I'm trying to feed my family, put a roof over my family's head.
All right, my friends, this is awesome. Q, I'm going to write that treatise and be ready to present my opinion tomorrow, bright and early. We'll start at 4 a.m. and, we'll take 3 extra hours and I'll take you through all the points individually.
4 a.m. Eastern time is when we're going to start. So hope you guys tune in. Stay humble, stack sats. I'm going back to bed.
Peace.